Welcome up and to rainy Chisinau. The 11th of July is the date foreseen for the anticipated parliamentary elections in the Republic of Moldova. But before talking about the electoral campaign, we need a bit of background. Back in December 2020, the election of Maia Sandu has led to the resignation of former Prime Minister Ion Chicu. Since then, the parliament became the theater of the fight between the Party of Action and Solidarity of Maia Sandu and the Party of the Socialists of the Republic of Moldova of Igor Dodon. At the end of January, the Socialists and SURE proposed Mariana Durleșteanu as Prime Minister. Sandu ignored their request and nominated Natalia Gavrilița, former Minister of Finance in her government. Yet, the candidate did not receive a positive vote of confidence from the parliament. After a few weeks, Sandu nominated her again, decision that was deemed unconstitutional by the Supreme Court. In March, the president chose Igor Grosu, new leader of PAS. Despite the protests of the socialists, this time the court deemed the decision lawful. Still, Grosu failed to obtain the vote of confidence from the parliament. This was expected. Yet, the strategy of Sandu was not to successfully nominate a prime minister, but to fail twice to be able to call new elections within 45 days from the first request, as required by paragraph 2, article 85 of the Constitution. In fact, during the electoral campaign, Sandu had promised not to nominate a prime minister she did not like. She proved convinced that the Socialists, the Democratic Party and SURE belong to a corrupt system of power that needs to be ousted of parliament. Nevertheless, when Sandu seemed ready to decide the date of the new elections, Dodon made his move. On the 31st of March, the parliament convoked the state of emergency for 60 days in connection to the SARS-CoV-2 epidemic. The move was almost immediately read as political because the decision did not contain relevant restrictions. The government introduced a curfew from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m., limited the opening hours of non-essential businesses, and restricted access to public parks. In less than a week, this last limitation was lifted by the mayors of the major cities. Already on the 7th of April, interim Prime Minister Ciocoi declared at Cutia Neagra on TV 8 that 30 days of emergency were enough, and that the decision had been exploited for political reasons. As a matter of fact, at the same article of the Constitution, it is clarified that a president cannot call new elections if the country is in state of emergency. With a relative majority in parliament, Dodon wanted to avoid a second electoral confrontation that could diminish the strength of his party. Despite the delay, at the end of April, Sandu was able to call new elections for the 11th of July 2021. In the meantime, of course, the country had to be governed, and as anticipated, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Government Chicu, Aureliu Ciocoi, has been interim Prime Minister for more than 6 months already. At the elections, there will be 23 different parties, trying to contend themselves to 101 seats in parliament. Among the known candidates, there are also some new entries. An example is the Party for Development and Consolidation of Moldova, led by former Prime Minister Ion Chicu. Another is the party Law and Right of Mariana Durleșteanu that, as we said, was proposed by the Socialists and SURE in recent months as possible prime minister to succeed Chicu. Among the candidates who have been protagonists in this electoral campaign is certainly the party Let's Build Europe at Home, PACE, led by former policeman Gheorghe Cafcaliuc. In April, party members attacked the president of the Sângerei region by spraying him with green paint. The politician was guilty of skipping the line in the vaccination procedure against the SARS-CoV-2 virus. In those weeks, the vaccine were only available to healthcare professionals. There have been dozens of violations around the country, but there have been no authoritative initiatives aimed at punishing offenders. Therefore, the candidates of PACE, with a fascist zealousness, decided to enforce the order. Gheorghe Cafcaliuc himself became the protagonist of what in informal politics is defined as character assassination, which consists in destroying the reputation of a political opponent. When on Cutia Neagra on TV 8, he reported that in 2016 Nata Albot, well-known journalist and co-host of the popular web program Internetul Grăiește, was stopped at the Chisinau airport with 0.78 grams of marijuana. Albot had recently accepted PAS's proposal to join the ranks of electoral candidates, but shortly after the revelation she decided to withdraw. Clearly, the police had not initiated an investigation and had closed the case. Still, Kafkaliuk, probably leveraging on his professional knowledge, managed to get his hands on the police report and show it live on television. Clearly, the revelation was followed by television reports from groups close to the socialists who referred to Albot alternatively as a drug addict and a narco-trafficker. Surprising has been the choice of the former mayor of Chișinău, Dorin Chirtoacă, to join the ranks of AUR, an extreme-right Romanian party often identified as neo-fascist. Its Moldovan counterpart focuses mainly on the rhetoric of the reunification with Romania. Other candidates known to the general audience include Andrei Năstase, head of the Truth and Dignity platform, former member of the Acum coalition with PAS, and the Democratic Party of former Prime Minister Pavel Filip. Those who follow Moldovan politics for years already know that these two parties have confronted bitterly since 2015, when the oligarch on the run, Vladimir Plahotniuc, was head of the Democratic Party. Yet none of these parties will likely gather enough votes to overcome the threshold and enter the parliament. Most of votes will be swapped by PAS and the renewed coalition of Dodon and Voronin. In fact, for the first time after years, the party of the Communists of the Republic of Moldova of the former Moldovan autocrat Vladimir Voronin will enter parliament. Voronin is even the first on the list in this coalition. For what we know, when Dodon left Voronin, he was compared to Judah. Yet the two leftist leaders must have found a way to forget the old grudge and joined forces in what seems to be one last final battle. Dodon's choice of taking Voronin on board is smart because it will reinvigorate an image weakened by a poor presidential campaign. Particularly, socialists and communists will likely gather the votes of older electors and those from the country's peripheries. Their communication strategy has focused on the fear of change, completely different when compared to the hopeful messages of the populists of PAS. Populist is not an offense per se, it's just a statement over a thin ideology characterizing the party of interim president Igor Grosu. In fact, populism qualifies as a thin-centered ideology relying on the conception of a society divided in two different parts, the pure people and the corrupt elite. In this sense, politics should be exercised by the general will, as intended by Rousseau, and it will be functional when the people will become the protagonist again. This can be read and seen everywhere in the communication of PAS. Do you remember the slogan Evremia oamenilor buni? These pure people will certainly support PAS, particularly through the vote of the diaspora. Yet the past week have been characterized by a debate on the choice of the Central Electoral Committee to have 139 polling stations abroad, the same number had during the presidential elections of last year. But we remember the long queues during the past vote. According to PAS, this choice was influenced by the socialists within Czech. Czech justified with the fact that there was not enough money to pay for more polling stations. Many parties appealed the decision, and the Court of Appeal has forced Czech to have at least 150 polling stations abroad, the minimum number required by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Two more parties that may enter parliament are SOR and Our Party of Renato Usati. This is likely because of the particular tie that these parties have with the territory of Orhei and Belz, where he is the mayor. Usati had been always a controversial candidate. Pro-Russian, with strange ties to the Russian criminal underworld, he became famous as a sort of gangster politician. Usati's party has been financed for years by his Russian counterpart, Our Party of the nationalist Vladimir Zhirinovsky. Yet, competition with Dodon caused him judicial problems in Moscow. Since 2015, he presented himself as an anti-corruption candidate. But this operation has been read by political analysts as a substantial rebranding in the eyes of the electorate. During 2016, he fled Moldova and returned only in 2019 with the inauguration of government Sandu, knowing that Plahotniuc had left. Lately, he has also been questioned for conflict of interests, having invested in a few projects in Belz. Still, he will be probably determinant in resolving the impasse that may create the competition between PAS and the Social Communist coalition. Will he become the next prime minister? I'm Understanding Politics. Thank you for watching.